Chapter 5. Milva did not have time to reach the horses and save them. She was a witness to their theft, but a helpless one. First, she was swept along by the frantic, panic-stricken crowd. Then the road was obstructed by careering wagons, and finally she became stuck in a woolly, bleating flock of sheep, through which she had to force her way as though it were a snowdrift. Later, by the chotler, only a leap into the tall rushes growing in the marshes by the bank saved her from the Nilfgaardian swords as they ruthlessly cut down the fugitives crowded by the river, showing no mercy either to women or children. Milva jumped into the water and reached the other bank, partly wading and partly swimming on her back among the corpses being carried by the current. And she took up the hunt. She remembered the direction in which the peasants who had stolen Roach, Pegasus, the chestnut colt, and her own black had fled, and her priceless bow was still attached to her saddle. Tough luck, she thought, feet squelching in her wet boots as she ran. The others will have to cope without me for now. I must get my damn bow and horse back. She freed Pegasus first. The poet's horse was ignoring the heels digging into his sides. He was paying no heed to the urgent shouts of the inexperienced rider and had no intention of galloping. Instead, he trotted slowly through the birchwood. The poor fellow was being left a long way behind the other horse thieves. When he heard and then saw Milva over his shoulder, he jumped off without a second thought and bolted into the undergrowth, holding up his breeches with both hands. Milva did not pursue him, overcoming her seething desire to exact some serious revenge. She leapt into the saddle in full flight, landing heavily and making the strings of the lute fastened to the saddlebags twang. A skilled horsewoman, she managed to force the gelding to a gallop, or rather, to the lumbering canter that Pegasus considered a gallop. But even this pseudo-gallop was enough, for the horse thieves' escape had been slowed by another tricky mount. The witcher's skittish Roach, the infuriating sulky bay mare Geralt had so often sworn he'd exchange for another steed, whether it be an ass, a mule, or even a billy-goat. Milva caught up with the thieves, just as Roach, irritated by a clumsy tug of the reins, had thrown her rider to the ground. The rest of the peasants had dismounted and were trying to get the frisky and excitable mare under control. They were so busy, they only noticed Milva when she rode among them on Pegasus and kicked one of them in the face, breaking his nose. When he fell to the ground, howling and calling upon the gods, she recognized him. It was Cloggy, a peasant who clearly had no luck in his dealings with people, or, more particularly, with Milva. Unfortunately, luck deserted Milva too. To be precise, it wasn't her luck that was to blame, more her own conceit and her conviction, based on shaky practical evidence, that she could beat up any brace of peasants she happened to meet in whatever manner she chose. When she dismounted, she was punched in the eye and found herself on the ground. She drew her knife, ready to spill some guts, but was hit over the head with a stout stick so hard that it broke, blinding her with bark and rotten wood. Stunned and blinded, she still managed to grab the knee of the peasant beating her with the remains of the stick when he unexpectedly howled and keeled over. The other yelled too, bringing both hands up to protect his head. Milva rubbed her eyes and saw that he was protecting himself from a rain of blows from a knout, dealt by a man riding a grey horse. She sprang up, dealing a powerful kick to the neck of the prostrate peasant. The rustler wheezed and flailed his legs, leaving his loins unprotected. Milva took advantage of that at once, channeling all her anger into a well-aimed kick. The peasant, curled up in a ball, clamped his hands on his crotch and howled so loudly leaves fell from the birch trees. Meanwhile, the horseman on the grey was busy with Cloggy, whose nose was streaming blood, and with the other peasant. He chased them away into the trees with blows from the knout. He returned in order to thrash the one on the ground, but reined in his horse. Milva had managed to catch her black and was holding her bow with an arrow already nocked. The bowstring was only pulled halfway back, but the arrowhead was pointing directly at the horseman's chest. For a moment, they looked at each other, the horseman and the young woman. Then, with a slow movement, he pulled an arrow with long fletchings from his belt and threw it down at Milva's feet. "I knew I'd have the chance to give you back your arrow, elf," he said calmly. "I'm not an elf, Nilfgaardian. And I'm not a Nilfgaardian. Put that bow down, will you? If I wished you ill, I could have just stood by and watched those peasants kick you around." "The devil only knows," she said through her teeth, "who you are and what you wish for me. But thanks for saving me, and for my arrow, and for dealing with that good-for-nothing I didn't hit properly the other day." The roughed-up horse thief still curled up in a ball, choked back his sobs, his face buried in the leaf litter. The horseman didn't even look at him. He looked at Milva. "Catch the horses," he said. "We have to get away from the river, and fast, too. The army's combing the forests on both banks." "We have to," she said, grimacing and lowering her bow. "Together? Since when were we comrades, or a company?" "I'll explain," he said, steering his horse and grabbing the chestnut's reins. "If you give me time." "The point is, I don't have any time. The Witcher and the others, I know. But we won't save them by letting ourselves get killed or captured. Catch the horses, and we'll flee into the forest. Hurry." "His name's Caer," Milva recalled, glancing at her companion, with whom she was now sitting in the pit left by a fallen tree. "A strange Nilfgaardian who says he isn't a Nilfgaardian. Caer." "We thought they'd killed you," she muttered. "The riderless chestnut came running past us." "I had a minor adventure," he answered dryly, "with 3 brigands, as shaggy as werewolves. They ambushed me. The horse got away. The brigands didn't, but then they were on foot. Before I managed to get a new mount, I'd fallen far behind you. I only managed to catch up with you this morning, right by the camp. I crossed the river down in the gully and waited on the far bank. I knew you'd head east." One of the horses, concealed in the alder wood, snorted and stamped its hooves. Dusk was falling. Mosquitoes whined annoyingly around their ears. "It's quiet in the forest," Caer said. "The armies have gone. The battle is over." "The slaughter's over, you mean?" "Our cavalry—" He stammered and cleared his throat. "The Imperial cavalry attacked the camp, and then troops appeared from the south. I think it was the Temerian army. If the battle's over, we should go back. We should search for the Witcher, Dandelion, and the others." "It would be better to wait until nightfall." "There's something horrible about this place," she said softly, tightening her grip on the bow. "It's such a bleak wilderness. It gives me the shivers. Apparently quiet, but there's always something rustling in the bushes. The Witcher said ghouls are attracted to battlefields, and the peasants were telling stories about a vampire." "You aren't alone," he replied under his breath. "It's much more frightening when you're alone." "Indeed," she nodded, empathizing with him. "After all, you've been following us for almost a fortnight, all alone. You've been trudging after us while surrounded by your people. You might say you're not an Nilfgaardian, but they're still yours, aren't they? Devil take me if I understand it. Instead of going back to your own, you're tracking the Witcher. Why?" "It's a long story." When the tall Scoia'tael leant over him, Strucken, who was bound to a pole, blinked in fear. It was said there was no such thing as an ugly elf, that every single one of them was comely, that they were born beautiful, and perhaps the legendary commander of the squirrels had been born beautiful. But now that his face was gashed by a hideous diagonal scar deforming his forehead, eyebrow, nose, and cheek, nothing remained of his elven good looks. The elf with the disfigured physiognomy sat down on a fallen tree trunk. "I am Isengrim Foeltiarna," he said, leaning over the captive once again. "I've been fighting humans for 4 years and leading a commando for 3. I have buried my brother who fell in combat, 4 cousins, and more than 400 brothers-in-arms. In my struggle, I treat your Imperator as my ally, as I have proved several times by passing intelligence to your spies, helping your agents, and eliminating individuals selected by you." Foeltiarna fell silent and made a sign with his gloved hand. The Scoia'tael, standing alongside, picked up a small birch-bark canteen. The canteen gave off a sweet aroma. "I considered and consider Nilfgaard an ally," the elf with the scar repeated, "which is why I did not initially believe my informant when he warned that a trap was being laid for me, that I would receive instructions for a private meeting with an Nilfgaardian emissary, and that I would be captured then. I didn't believe, but being cautious by nature, I turned up for the rendezvous a little earlier than expected, and not alone. Much to my surprise and dismay, instead of the said emissary, there were 6 thugs waiting with a fishing net, ropes, a leather mask and a gag, and a straitjacket fastened with straps and buckles. Standard equipment used by your secret service during abductions, I would say. Nilfgaard wanted to capture me, Foeltiarna, alive, and transport me somewhere gagged and securely fastened in a straitjacket. A curious affair, I would say, and one requiring some elucidation. I'm delighted that I managed to take alive at least one of the thugs who had been set on me, no doubt their leader, who will be able to furnish me with that elucidation. Strucken gritted his teeth and turned his head away, in order not to look at the elf's disfigured face. He preferred to look at the birch-bark canteen and the two wasps buzzing around it. "And now," Foltiana continued, wiping his sweaty neck with a scarf, "let's have a little chat, Master Kidnapper. To make the conversation flow, let me clarify a few points. There is maple syrup in the canteen. Should our little chat not proceed in a spirit of mutual understanding and complete frankness, we shall copiously anoint your head with the aforementioned syrup, paying very close attention to your eyes and ears. Then we shall place you on an anthill, this one here, to be precise, over which these charming, hard-working insects are scurrying. Let me add that this method has already proved its worth in the case of several Doine and Angivare, who evinced great stubbornness and a lack of candour." "I am in the Imperial service," the spy screamed, blanching. "I am an officer of the Imperial Military Intelligence, a subordinate of Lord Vatje de Rido, Viscount of Idon. My name is Jan Strucken. I protest—" "What awful luck," the elf interrupted him, "that these red ants, greedy for maple syrup, have never heard of the Viscount. Let us begin. I shall not ask who gave the order for my abduction, because it is obvious. So my first question shall be, where was I to be taken?" The Nilfgaardian spy struggled against the ropes and jerked his head, for it seemed to him the ants were already crawling over his cheeks, but he remained silent. "Too bad," Foltiana said, breaking the silence and gesturing to the elf with the canteen. "Apply the syrup." "I was to transport you to Niflgaard Castle in Verden," Strucken yelled, "on the orders of Viscount Rido." "Thank you. And what awaited me there?" "An interrogation." "What was I to be asked about?" "About the events on Thanith. Untie me, I beg you. I'll tell you everything." "Of course you will," the elf sighed, stretching, "particularly since we've already made a start, and in matters like these, that's usually the most difficult part. Continue." "I was ordered to make you confess where Vilgefortz and the Ryans are hiding, and Kaye Mahor Dyfrin, son of Kjellach." "How comical. A trap led to ask me about Vilgefortz and the Ryans? Whatever would I know about them? What could link me with them? And Kaye. That's even more comical. I sent him to you, did I not? Just as you requested, in fetters. Are you saying the package didn't arrive?" "The unit which was sent to the designated rendezvous point was slaughtered. Kaye was not among the dead." "Ah, and Lord Vatje de Rido became suspicious. But instead of sending another emissary to the commando and asking for an explanation, he immediately laid a trap for me, and ordered me dragged to Nastrog in chains and interrogated about the incidents on Thanith." The spy said nothing. "Didn't you get it?" the elf said, and bent his head, bringing his hideous face towards Strucken. That was a question, and it ran, "What's this all about?" I don't know, I swear." Foltiana beckoned with a hand and pointed. Strucken howled, thrashed around, swore on the great sun, pleaded his innocence, wept, tossed his head about, and spat out the syrup which had been thickly smeared over his face. Only when he was carried over to the anthill by Foursquare Tile did he decide to talk, although the consequences of speaking were potentially more dreadful than the ants. "Sire, should anyone find out about this, I'm dead meat. But I shall disclose it to you. I've seen confidential orders. I've eavesdropped. I'll tell you everything." "Of course you will," the elf nodded. "The record on the anthill is 1 hour and 40 minutes, and belongs to a certain officer from King Demervain's special forces. But even he talked in the end. Very well, begin. Quickly, coherently, and to the point." "The Imperator is certain he was betrayed on Thanith. The traitor is Vilgefortz of Roggeveen, a sorcerer, and his assistant the Ryons, but mostly Kaye Mahor Dyfrin of Kjellach. Vatje, Viscount Vatje, is not certain whether you Scoia'tael also had hand in the treachery, if only unwittingly, which is why he ordered you to be seized and delivered in secret to Niflgaard Castle. Lord Foltiana, I've been working in the Secret Service for 20 years. Vatje de Rido is my third boss." "More coherently, please, and stop shaking. If you're frank with me, you'll still be able to serve a few more bosses."
Although it was kept absolutely confidential, I knew who Vilgefortz and Kaia were supposed to capture on the island. And it looked like they had succeeded, because they brought that princess from Cintra to Lot's Grim. I thought they'd pulled it off, that Kaia and Rialds would become barons, and that sorcerer a count at least. But instead the Imperator summoned Lord Skellen, and ordered him and Lord Vate to capture Kaia, and Rialds, and Vilgefortz. Anyone who might know anything about Thaneth and that incident was to be tortured, including you. It didn't take much to guess, that it was treachery, that the sham princess had been brought to Lot's Grim.
The spy struggled to breathe, nervously gasping for air through lips covered with maple syrup. "Untie him," Voltiana ordered his squirrels, "and let him wash his face." The order was carried out immediately. A moment later, the mastermind of the unsuccessful ambush was standing with head lowered before the legendary square-tile commander. Voltiana looked at him indifferently. "Scrape the syrup thoroughly from your ears," he finally said. "Then prick them up and listen carefully, as befits a spy with many years' experience. I shall give you proof of my loyalty to the Imperator. I shall give you a thorough account of the matters that interest him, and you will repeat everything, word for word, to Vate de Rido." The spy nodded eagerly. "In the middle of Bléthe, which according to your reckoning is the beginning of June," the elf began, "I was contacted by Enid Angliana, the sorceress also known as Francesca Findebayer. Soon after, on her orders, a certain Ryons came to my commando. He was said to be the factotum of Vilgefortz of Roggeveen, also a sorcerer. A plan of action was drawn up in utter secrecy with the aim of eliminating a number of mages during the conclave on the Isle of Thaneth. The plan was presented as one having the full support of Imperator Emhyr, Vate de Rido, and Stefan Skellen. Otherwise I should not have agreed to collaborate with Doine, sorcerers or not, for I have seen too many entrapments in my life. The involvement of the Empire was confirmed by the arrival of a ship at Cape Bremervoord. On board was Kair, son of Kielach, equipped with special authorization and orders. According to those orders, I selected a special squad from the commando, which would be answerable only to Kair. I was aware that they were trusted to capture and remove a certain individual from the island. We sailed to Thaneth, Voltiana began again after a pause, on the ship which had brought Kair. Ryons had some amulets, and they used them to surround the ship with a magical fog. We sailed into the caverns beneath the island. From there, we proceeded to the catacombs and the Garstang. There we realized at once that something wasn't right. Ryons had received some telepathic signals from Vilgefortz. We knew we'd have to start fighting any minute. Fortunately, we were ready, because the moment we left the catacombs, we were plunged into hell. The elf contorted his mutilated face, as though the recollection pained him. After our initial successes, matters became complicated. We were unable to eliminate all the royal sorcerers, and we took heavy casualties. Several mages who were party to the conspiracy also perished, while others began to save their skins and teleport away. All of a sudden, Vilgefortz vanished, then Ryons, and Enid Angliana soon followed suit. I treated that final disappearance as the conclusive signal for our withdrawal. I did not, however, give the order, but waited for the return of Kair and his squad, who had set off at once to carry out their mission. When they did not return, we began to search for them. No one, Voltiana said, looking the Nilfgaardian spy in the eyes, survived from that squad. They were all brutally slaughtered. We found Kair on the steps leading to Tol Lara, a tower which exploded during the battle and ended up as a heap of rubble. He was wounded and unconscious. It was clear he had not accomplished the mission he had been assigned. There was no sign of his target anywhere, and royal troops were already pouring out of Aretuza and Loxia. I knew there was no way Kair could fall into their hands, because it would have been proof of Nilfgaard's active involvement in the operation. So we took him with us, and fled back to the catacombs and then the caverns. We boarded the ship and sailed away. 12 remained of my commando, most of them wounded. The wind was at our backs. We landed to the west of Herundum and hid in the forest. Kair was trying to tear off his bandages and was yelling something about an insane girl with green eyes, about the lion cub of Cintra, about a witcher who had massacred his men, about the Tower of Gulls and a mage who flew like a bird. He demanded a horse and ordered us to return him to the island, citing the imperial orders, which, under the circumstances, I had to treat as the ravings of a madman. As we knew, war was already raging in Edirn, so I considered it more important to swiftly rebuild my depleted commando and resume the fight against the Doine. Cair was still with us when I found your secret order in a dead drop. I was astonished. Although Cair had clearly not completed his mission, there was nothing to suggest he was guilty of treachery. But I did not ponder over it for long, judging that it was your business and that you ought to clear it up. Cair put up no resistance to being tied up. He was calm and resigned. I ordered him to be placed in the coffin and, with the help of a hawker acquaintance, delivered to the location designated in the letter. I was not, I admit, inclined to further deplete my commando by providing an escort. I don't know who murdered your men at the rendezvous point, but only I knew where it was. So, if this version of the totally random extermination of your unit doesn't suit you, search for traitors among your own, because only you and I knew the time and place. Foiltiana stood up. That is all. All the information I have given here is true. I would not supply you with anything more in the dungeons of Nastrog. The lies and confabulations with which I might try to satisfy the investigating officer and his torturers would actually do more harm than good. I do not know anything more. In particular, I don't know Vilgefort's and Ryons' whereabouts, and neither do I know if your suspicions of betrayal are justified. I also emphatically declare that I know nothing about the princess from Cintra, the genuine or the sham one. I have told you everything I know. I trust that neither Lord Dorido nor Stefan Skellen will want to set any more traps for me. The Doina have been trying to capture and kill me for a long, long time, so I have adopted the custom of ruthless extermination of all trap-setters. I shall not, in the future, investigate to check if one of the trap-setters is, by chance, a subordinate of Vatier or Skellen. I do not have the time, nor the desire to make such an investigation. Do I make myself clear? Struyken nodded and swallowed. Now take a horse, spy, and get the hell out of my forest. You mean they were delivering you to the gallows? Milver mumbled. Now I understand some of it, but not everything. Why, instead of holing up somewhere, are you following the Witcher? He's really got it in for you, and he spared your life twice. 3 times. I saw 2 of them. Though you weren't the one who beat the shit out of the Witcher on Thanedd as a first thought, I don't think you ought to get in the way of his sword again. There's a lot about your feud I don't understand, but you saved me and you've got an honest face. So I'll tell you, Cair, bluntly. When the Witcher talks about the men who took his Ciri to Niflgaard, he grinds his teeth until sparks fly, and if you spat on him, he would steam. Ciri, he repeated. Sounds nice. Didn't you know? No. My people always called her Cirilla, or the lion cub of Cintra, and when she was with me, for she was once, she didn't say a single word, even though I saved her life. Only the devil himself could grasp all this, Milver said, exasperated. Your fates are all entangled, Cair, knotted and mixed up. It's too much for my head. And what's your name? He suddenly asked. Milver. Maria Barring, but call me Milver. The Witcher's heading the wrong way, Milver, he offered a moment later. Ciri isn't in Niflgaard. The kidnappers didn't take her to Niflgaard. If it was a kidnap at all. What do you mean? It's a long story. By the great sun, Fringilla said, standing in the doorway, tilting her head and looking in astonishment at her friend. What have you done to your hair, Asire? I washed it, Azire va Anahid replied coldly, and styled it. Come in and sit down. Get out of that chair, Merlin. Shoo! The sorceress sat down in the chair the black cat had reluctantly vacated, her eyes still fixed on her friend's coiffure. Stop staring, Azire said, touching her bouffant and glistening curls. I decided to make a few changes. Why, I just took your lead. I was always taken as an oddball and a rebel, Fringilla Vigo chuckled,
But when they see you in the academy or at court—" "I'm seldom at court," Asira cut her off, "and the academy will have to get used to it. This is the 13th century. It's high time we challenged this superstition that dressing up is proof of an enchantress's flightiness and the superficiality of her mind." "Fingernails too?" Fringilla said, slightly narrowing her green eyes, which never, ever missed anything. "Whatever next, darling? I hardly recognize you." "A simple spell," the enchantress replied coolly, "ought to be enough to prove it's me and no doppelganger. Cast the spell if you must, and then let's move on to the matter in hand. I ask something of you." Fringilla Vigo stroked the cat, which was rubbing himself against her calf, purring and arching his back, pretending it was a gesture of friendship and not a veiled hint that the black-haired sorceress should get up from the armchair. "The same thing Seneschal Kyailach ab Gruffydd asked of you?" she said without raising her head. "Indeed," Azira confirmed in hushed tones. "Kyailach visited me, distraught, and asked me to intercede to save his son. Emir has ordered him to be captured, tortured, and executed. Who else could he turn to except a relative? Maur, Kyailach's wife and Kai's mother, is my niece, my sister's youngest daughter. In spite of all that, I didn't promise him anything, because my hands are tied. Certain circumstances took place recently, which do not permit me to draw attention to myself. I shall elucidate, but only after you've given me the information I asked you to gather." Fringilla Vigo furtively sighed with relief. She had been afraid her friend would want to get involved in the case of Cair, son of Kyailach, which had gallows written all over it, and equally afraid she would be asked for help she couldn't refuse. "Around the middle of July," she began, "the entire court at Lothsgrim had the opportunity to marvel at a 15-year-old girl, supposedly the Princess of Cintra, whom Emir insisted on referring to as Your Majesty during the audience, and was treated so kindly there were even rumours of a quick marriage." "So I heard," Azira said, stroking the cat, which had given up on Fringilla and was trying to occupy her own armchair instead. "This doubtlessly political marriage is still talked about, but more discreetly and not so often, for the Cintran was moved to Darn Rowan. Prisoners of state, as you know, are often kept in Darn Rowan. Potential imperatrices much less often." Azire didn't comment. She waited patiently, examining her freshly filed and varnished fingernails. "You must remember," Fringilla Vigo continued, "how Emir summoned us all 3 years ago and ordered us to establish the whereabouts of a certain individual within the northern kingdoms. You must also recall how furious he became when we failed. Albrecht, who explained it was impossible to detect anything from such a distance, never mind bypassing protective screens, was severely reprimanded. But that's not all. A week after the aforementioned audience in Lothsgrim, when victory at Aldersberg was being celebrated, Emir noticed myself and Albrecht in the castle chamber, and graced us with his conversation. The gist of his speech, only somewhat trivializing it, was, 'You're all of you leeches, sponges and idlers. Your conjuring tricks cost me a fortune, and there's nothing to show for it. The task which your entire lamentable academy failed to achieve was carried out in 4 days by an ordinary astrologist.'" Aziriva Anahid snorted disdainfully and continued to stroke the cat. "It was easy to discover," Fringilla Vigo went on, "that the miracle worker was none other than the infamous astrologist Zarthisius. I take it the subject of the search was the Cintran candidate for the position of Imperatrice. Zarthisius found her, and then what? Was he appointed Secretary of State, head of the Department of Unfeasible Affairs? No, he was thrown into a dungeon the following week. I fear I fail to understand what this has to do with Cair, son of Kyailach. Patience! Don't make me get ahead of myself. This is crucial. I beg your pardon. Go on. Do you remember what Emir gave us when we began our search 3 years ago? A lock of hair. Precisely, Fringilla said, reaching for a small leather purse. And this is it. A few blonde hairs belonging to a 6-year-old girl. I kept the remnants, and it's worth your knowing that Stella Congreve, Countess of Liddethal, is looking after the Cintran princess who is being kept in isolation in Darnaraun. Stella happens to be indebted to me for various reasons, so it was easy for me to come by a second lock of hair. And this is it. Somewhat darker, but hair darkens with age. Nonetheless, the locks belong to two totally different people. I've examined them, and there is no doubt in this respect. I had expected a revelation of this kind, Ciri Anahid admitted, when I heard that the Cintran had been shut up in Don Rowan. The astrologer either fouled up completely or is implicated in a conspiracy that planned to supply Emir with a bogus individual. A conspiracy which will cost Cair ep Cailech his head. Thank you, Fringilla. Everything is clear. Not everything, the sorceress said, and shook her head of black hair. First of all, it wasn't Zathisius who found the Cintran or took her to Lotsgrim. The astrologist started on his horoscopes and astromancy after Emir realized he had a bogus princess and began an intensive search for the real one. And the old fool ended up in the dungeon because of a simple mistake in his art of fraud. For he had established the whereabouts of the person Emir sought with a radial tolerance of approximately 100 miles, and that region turned out to be a desert, a savage wilderness somewhere beyond the Tir Trocher Massif and the riverhead of the Velda. Stefan Skelen, who was sent there, found nothing but scorpions and vultures. I wouldn't have expected much more from Zathisius, but that won't affect Cair's fate. Emir is quick-tempered, but he never sentences anyone to torture or death just like that without evidence. Someone, as you said yourself, made sure the bogus princess was taken to Lotsgrim in place of the real one. Someone came up with a double. So there was a conspiracy, and Cair became mixed up in it, possibly unwittingly, which means he was used. If that was the case, he would have been used until the goal was reached. He would personally have delivered the double to Emir. But Cair has vanished without a trace. Why? His disappearance was sure to have aroused suspicions. Did he fear Emir would notice the deception at first glance? For he did. He couldn't fail to. After all, he had a lock of hair, Ciri cut in. A lock of hair from a 6-year-old girl. Fringilla. Emir hasn't been hunting for that girl for 3 years, but for much longer. It looks as though Cair has become embroiled in something very nasty, something which began when he was still riding a stick horse and pretending to be a knight. Leave me those strands of hair. I'd like to test them both thoroughly. Fringilla Vigo nodded slowly and narrowed her green eyes. I will. But be cautious, Ciri. Don't get mixed up in any dirty business, because it might draw attention to you. And at the beginning of the conversation, you hinted that attention would be inconvenient to you, and promised you'd reveal why. Ciri Anahid stood up, walked over to the window, and stared at the spires and pinnacles of Niflgaard, the capital of the empire, called the City of the Golden Towers, shimmering in the setting sun. You once told me, and I remembered it, she said without turning around, that no borders should ever divide magic, that magic should have the highest values, be above all divisions, that what was needed was some kind of secret organization, something like a convent or a lodge. I am ready, said Fringilla Vigo, Nilfgaardian sorceress, breaking the short silence. My mind is made up, and I am ready. Thank you for your trust and the distinction. When and where will this lodge meet, my mysterious and enigmatic friend? Ciri Anahid, Nilfgaardian sorceress, turned away. The hint of a smile played on her lips. Soon, she said. I'll explain everything to you soon. But first, before I forget, give me the address of your milliner, Fringilla. There isn't a single fire, Milva whispered, staring at the dark bank beyond the river, gleaming in the moonlight. Or a living soul there, I reckon. There were 200 refugees in the camp. Has no one got off scot-free? If the Imperial troops won, they took them all captive, Cair whispered back. If your boys got the upper hand, they took the refugees with them when they moved on.
They neared the riverbank and the reeds covering the marsh. Milva trod on something and sprang back, suppressing a scream at the sight of a stiff arm covered in leeches sticking out of the mud. "It's just a dead body," Kaya muttered, grabbing her hand. "One of ours, a Deirlanian." "Who is he?" "One of the 7th Deirlanian Cavalry Brigade. See the silver scorpion on his sleeve?" "By the gods!" The girl shuddered and gripped her bow tightly in her sweating fist. "Did you hear that noise? What was it?" "A wolf. Or a ghoul. Or some other hell spawn. There must be a whole load of dead bodies in the camp. My pox on it, I'm not crossing that river at night." "Fine. We'll wait until dawn." "Milva, what's that strange—" "Rages," the archer said, stifling a shout at the scent of wormwood, sage, coriander, and aniseed. "Rages? Is that you?" "Yes, it's me," the barber surgeon replied, noiselessly emerging from the gloom. "I was worried about you, but you're not alone, I see." "Aye." Milva released Kaye's arm, noticing he had already drawn his sword. "I'm not alone, and he's not alone any more. But that's a long story, as some people would say. Rages, what about the Witcher and Dandelion, and the others? Do you know what's happened to them?" "Indeed I do. Do you have horses?" "Yes, they're hidden in the willows." "Then let's head southwards, down the Chotla, without delay. We must reach Armeria before midnight." "What about the Witcher and the poet? Are they alive?" "Yes, but they're in a bit of difficulty." "What kind of difficulty?" "It's a long story." Dandelion groaned, trying to turn around and get into a slightly more comfortable position. It was, however, an impossible task for someone lying trussed up like a ham to be smoked in a pile of softwood shavings and sawdust. "They didn't hang us right away," he grunted. "There's hope for us still." "We aren't done for yet." "Would you mind shutting up?" the Witcher said, lying back calmly and looking up at the moon, visible through a hole in the roof of the woodshed. "Do you know why Visigurd didn't hang us right away? Because we're to be executed publicly at dawn, while the entire corps are mustered before moving out. For propaganda purposes." Dandelion did not respond to that. Geralt only heard him panting with worry. "You still have a chance of dodging the drop," he added, trying to reassure the poet. "Visigurd simply wants to exact his own private revenge on me. He hasn't got anything against you. Your friend the Count will get you out of trouble, you'll see." "That's crap," the bard replied, to the witch's astonishment, calmly and quite reasonably. "Crap, crap, crap. Don't treat me like a child. For one thing, 2 hanged men are better for propaganda purposes than 1. For another, you don't let a witness to private revenge live. No, brother, they'll stretch us both." "That's enough, Dandelion. Lie there quietly and think up a plan." "What bloody plan?" "Any bloody plan." The poet's idle chatter prevented the Witcher from gathering his thoughts, and he had no time to waste. He expected that men from Temerian military intelligence, some of whom must have been present in Visigurd's corps, would burst into the woodshed at any moment. Intelligence officers would surely be interested in asking him about various aspects of the events in Garstang on the Isle of Thaneth. Geralt hardly knew any of the details, but he was confident that he would be feeling very, very poorly indeed before the agents accepted this. All his hopes depended on Visigurd, blinded by the lust for revenge, not having made the Witcher's capture public. Intelligence officers might want to free the captives from the clutches of the furious marshal in order to take them to headquarters, or, to be more precise, take whatever was left of them after the first round of interrogation. The poet, meanwhile, had come up with a plan. "Geralt, let's pretend we know something important, that we really are spies or something like that. Then, Dandelion, please." "No? So we could try to bribe the sentries. I have some money hidden away. Doubloons, sewn into the lining of my boot, for a rainy day. We'll summon the sentries, who'll take all you have and then beat you up for good measure." The poet grumbled, but stopped talking. From the field they heard shouts, the patter of hooves, and, what was worse, the smell of army pea soup. At that moment, Geralt would have given all the sterlets and truffles in the world for a bowl of it. The sentries standing outside the shed were talking lazily, chuckling, and from time to time hawking up and spitting. The sentries were professional soldiers, which could be discerned by their remarkable ability to communicate using sentences constructed entirely of pronouns and coarse expletives. "Geralt?" "What?" "I wonder what's happened to Milva, and Zoltan, and Percival, and Regis. Did you see them?" "No. We can't rule out their being hacked to death or trampled by horses during the skirmish. The camp was knee-deep in corpses." "I can't believe," Dandelion declared resolutely, and with a note of hope in his voice, "I can't believe that crafty buggers like Zoltan and Percival, or Milva—" "Stop deluding yourself. Even if they did survive, they won't help us." "Why not?" "For 3 reasons. Firstly, they have their own problems. Secondly, we're lying tied up in a shed in the middle of a camp of several thousand soldiers." "And the third reason? You mentioned 3. "Thirdly," the Witcher replied in a tired voice, "the monthly quota on miracles was used up when the woman from Kurno found her missing husband." "Over there," the barber surgeon said, indicating the small dots of campfires, "is Fort Armeria, at present the camp of the Temerian army, concentrated at Maena." "Are the Witcher and Dandelion being held prisoner there?" Milva asked, standing up in her stirrups. "Huh, then things are bad. There must be hordes of armed men and guards everywhere. Won't be easy sneaking in there." "You won't have to," Regis responded, dismounting from Pegasus. The gelding gave a long snort and pulled his head away, clearly disgusted by the barber surgeon's herbal odour, which made his nostrils tingle. "You won't have to sneak in," he repeated. "I'll take care of it. You'll be waiting with the horses where the river's sparkling. Do you see? Beneath the brightest star in the 7 goats, the Chotler flows into the Aina there. Once I've got the Witcher out of trouble, I'll point him in that direction, and that's where you'll meet." "How arrogant is that?" Kaia muttered to Milva when they came close to each other, dismounting. "He'll get them out of trouble by himself, without anyone's help. Did you hear that? Who is he?" "In truth, I don't know," Milva muttered back. "But when it comes to impossible tasks, I believe him. Yesterday, in front of my very eyes, he got a red-hot horseshoe out of a fire with his bare hands." "Is he a sorcerer?" "No," Regis answered from behind Pegasus, demonstrating his exceptionally sensitive hearing. "But does it really matter who I am? After all, I haven't asked for your personal details." "I am Kaia Maur Daifrin ep Kielach." "I thank you, and am full of admiration." The barber surgeon's voice had a slight note of scorn. "I heard almost no Nilfgaardian accent when you pronounced your Nilfgaardian surname." "I'm not enough!" Milva cut him off. "This isn't the time for arguing or hesitating. Regis, the Witcher's waiting to be rescued." "Not before midnight," the barber surgeon said coldly, looking up at the moon. "So, we have some time to talk. Who is this person, Milva?" "That person," the archer replied, a little angry and standing up for Kaia, "rescued me from a tight spot. That person will tell the Witcher when he meets him that he's going in the wrong direction. Ciri's not in Nilfgaard." "A revelation indeed," the barber surgeon said, his voice softening. "And its source, Sir Kaia, son of Kielach?" "It's a long story." Dandelion had been silent for a long time, when one of the sentries suddenly stopped talking in the middle of a curse, and the other rasped or possibly groaned. Geralt knew there had been 3 on guard, so he listened intently, but the third didn't utter even the slightest sound. The Witcher waited, holding his breath, but what came to his ears a moment later was not the creaking of the door to the woodshed being opened by their rescuers. Not in the least. He heard even, soft, choral snoring. The sentries were quite simply asleep on duty. He breathed out, swore silently, and was just about to lose himself in thoughts about Yennefer when the medallion around the Witcher's neck suddenly vibrated, and the air was filled with the scent of wormwood, basil, coriander, sage, aniseed, and the devil only knew what else. "Regis?" he whispered in disbelief, ineffectually trying to lift his head from the wood shavings. "Regis?" Dandelion whispered back, moving around and rustling. No one else reeks like that. Where are you? I can't see you. Be quiet. The medallion stopped vibrating. Geralt heard the poet's relieved sigh, and immediately after, the soft hiss of a blade cutting his ropes. A moment later, Dandelion gave a moan of pain as his circulation returned, but dutifully tried to suppress it by sticking his fist into his mouth. Geralt, the barber-surgeon said, his vague, wavering shadow materializing at the Witcher's side, and immediately began to cut his bonds. You'll have to get past the camp guard yourselves. Head towards the east and the brightest star in the 7 goats, straight to the Aina. Milva's waiting for you there with the horses. Help me get up. He stood first on one leg and then on the other, biting his fist. Dandelion's circulation was already back to normal. A moment later, the Witcher was also ready for action. How are we going to get out? The poet suddenly asked. The sentries at the door are snoring, but they may— No, they won't, Regis interrupted in a whisper. But be careful when you leave. It's a full moon, and the field's lit by campfires. In spite of it being night, the entire camp is bustling. But perhaps that's a good thing. The corporals of the guard are bored of challenging the sentries. Out you go. Good luck. What about you? Don't worry about me. Don't wait for me, and don't look back. But Dandelion, the Witcher hissed. You've been told not to worry about him. Got it? Out you go, Regis repeated. Good luck. Until the next time, Geralt. The Witcher turned around. Thank you for rescuing us, he said. But it would be best if we never met again. Am I making myself clear? Absolutely. Don't waste time. The sentries were sleeping as they had fallen, snoring and smacking their lips. Not one of them even twitched when Geralt and Dandelion squeezed out through the slightly open door. Neither did any of them react when the Witcher unceremoniously pulled the thick homespun capes from 2 of them. That's no ordinary sleep, Dandelion whispered. Of course it isn't, Geralt said. Hidden in the dark of the woodshed's shadow, he looked around. I see, the poet sighed. Is Regis a sorcerer? No, not a sorcerer. He took that horseshoe from the fire, put the sentries to sleep. Stop wittering and concentrate. We aren't free yet. Wrap that cape around you and let's cross the field. If anyone stops us, we're pretending to be soldiers. Right. If anything happens, I'll say we're pretending to be stupid soldiers. Let's go. They crossed the field, keeping their distance from the soldiers crowded around glowing braziers and campfires. Soldiers were roaming about here and there. 2 more weren't conspicuous. They didn't arouse anyone's suspicions. No one questioned them or stopped them. They passed beyond the stockade quickly and without any difficulty. Everything went smoothly. In fact, too smoothly. Geralt became anxious, since he instinctively sensed danger, and his anxiety was growing, rather than diminishing, the further they moved from the centre of the camp. He repeated to himself that there was nothing strange in that. They hadn't drawn attention to themselves in the middle of a military camp that was busy even at night, and the only danger had been that of the alarm being raised, should someone notice the sleeping sentries at the door to the woodshed. Now, however, they were approaching the perimeter, where the sentries had, by necessity, to be vigilant. The fact that they were heading away from the centre of the camp could not be helping them. The Witcher recalled the plague of desertion in Visigurd's corps, and was certain the guards had orders to watch carefully for anyone trying to abandon the camp. The moon was shining brightly enough for Dandelion not to have to grope his way. This amount of light meant the Witcher could see as well as during the day, which enabled them to avoid 2 sentry posts and wait in the bushes for a mounted patrol to pass. There was an alder grove directly in front of them, apparently outside the ring of sentry posts. Everything was still going smoothly. Too smoothly. Their ignorance of military customs proved to be their undoing. They were tempted by the low, dark clump of alders because of the cover it offered. But since time immemorial, there have always been soldiers who lie in the bushes when it is their turn to be on guard duty, while the ones who aren't asleep keep an eye both on the enemy and on their own bloody-minded officers, should any of the latter descend on them with an unexpected inspection. Geralt and Dandelion had barely reached the alder grove before several dark shapes and spear blades loomed up in front of them. "Password."
"Cintra,"
Dandelion blurted out without hesitation. The soldiers chuckled as one. "Really, boys," one of them said, "is that the best you can do? If only someone could come up with something original. But no, nothing but Cintra. Missing home, are we? Well, the fee's the same as yesterday." Dandelion audibly ground his teeth. Geralt weighed up the situation and their chances. His assessment, decidedly crap. "Come on," the soldier said, hurrying them. "If you want to get through, pay up, and we'll turn a blind eye. And quickly, because the corporal of the guard will be here any second."
"Hold on,"
the poet said, changing his accent and mode of speech.
"I'll just sit down and get my boot off, because there's—"
He didn't manage to say anything else. 4 soldiers threw him to the ground. Then 2 of them, each one seizing one of his legs between theirs, pulled off his boots. The one who'd asked for the password tore the lining from the inside of a bootleg. Something scattered around with a jingle.
"Gold!" the leader yelled. "Pull the boots off the other one, and summon the corporal."
However, there was no one to do any boot-pulling or summoning, because half the guard dropped on their knees to search for the doubloons scattered among the leaves, while the other half immediately began fighting furiously over Dandelion's second boot. "It's now or never," Geralt thought, punching the leader in the jaw and then kicking him in the side of his head as he fell. The soldiers who were searching for gold didn't even notice. Dandelion needed no encouragement to spring up and dash through the bushes, his foot-traps flapping. Geralt ran after him. "Help! Help!" the leader of the watch bellowed from the ground, his voice soon after joined by his comrades. "Corporal!"
"You swine!"
Dandelion yelled back as he fled.
"Knaves! You stole my money!"
"Save your breath, dolt. See that forest? Make for it."
"Stop them! Stop them!"
They ran. Geralt swore furiously, hearing shouts, whistles, neighing, and the thudding of hooves behind them, and in front of them. His astonishment didn't last long. One careful look was enough. What he had taken for a forest and a safe haven was an approaching wall of cavalry, surging towards them like a wave. "Stop, Dandelion!" he shouted, then turned back to the patrol galloping in their direction and whistled piercingly through his fingers. "Niflgaard!" he yelled at the top of his voice. "Niflgaard are coming! Back to the camp! Get back to the camp, you fools! Sound the alarm! Niflgaard!" The leading rider of the patrol pursuing them reined his horse to a rapid stop, looked towards where Geralt had pointed, screamed in terror, and was about to turn back. But Geralt decided he had already done enough for the Cintran lions and Temerian lilies. He leapt at the soldier and dragged him from the saddle with a dexterous tug. "Jump on, Dandelion, and hold tight." The poet didn't need to be told twice. The horse sagged a little under the weight of an extra rider, but spurred on by 2 pairs of heels, was soon galloping hard. The approaching swarm of Nilfgaardians now represented a much greater threat than Visigerd and his corps, so they galloped along the ring of sentry posts, trying to escape from the area where the 2 armies would clash at any moment. The Nilfgaardians were close, however, and had seen them. Dandelion yelled. Then Geralt looked around and saw the dark wall of Nilfgaardian troops beginning to extend black tentacles of pursuit. Without hesitating, he steered the horse towards the camp, overtaking the fleeing guards. Dandelion yelled once again, but this time there was no need. The Witcher could also see the cavalry charging at them from the camp. Having been alerted, Visigerd's corps had mounted at admirable speed, and Geralt and Dandelion were caught in a trap. There was no way out. The Witcher changed the direction of their flight once more, and urged from the horse all the speed it could muster, trying to slip out of the dangerously narrowing gap between hammer and anvil. When hope dawned that they might just make it, the night air suddenly sang with a whistle of fletchings. Dandelion yelled, this time very loudly indeed, and dug his fingers into Geralt's sides. The Witcher felt something warm dripping onto his neck. "Hold on," he shouted, catching the poet by his elbow and drawing him closer to his own back. "Hold on, Dandelion."
"They've killed me,"
the poet howled, impressively loudly for a dead man.
"I'm bleeding. I'm dying."
"Hold on." The hail of arrows and quarrels, which was raining down on both armies and had proved to be so disastrous for Dandelion, was also their salvation. The armies under fire seethed and lost momentum, and the gap between the front lines, which had been about to draw together, remained open just long enough for the heavily snorting horse to whisk the 2 riders out of the trap. Geralt mercilessly forced his steed to ride hard, for although the trees and safety were looming up in front of them, hooves continued to thunder behind them. The horse grunted and stumbled, but did not stop, and they might have escaped had not Dandelion suddenly groaned and lurched backwards, dragging the Witcher out of the saddle with him. Geralt unintentionally tugged on the reins. The horse reared, and the two men tumbled to the ground among some very low pines. The poet thudded onto the dirt and lay still, groaning pathetically. His head and left shoulder were covered in blood, which glistened black in the moonlight. Behind them, the armies collided with thuds, clangs, and screams. But despite the raging battle, their Nilfgaardian pursuers hadn't forgotten about them. 3 cavalrymen were galloping towards them. The Witcher sprang up, feeling a swelling wave of cold fury and hatred inside him. He jumped out to meet their pursuers, drawing the horsemen's attention away from Dandelion, but not because he wanted to sacrifice himself for his friend. He wanted to kill. The leading rider, who had pulled ahead, flew at him with a raised battle-axe, but had no way of knowing he was attacking a Witcher. Geralt dodged the blow effortlessly, and seized the Nilfgaardian leaning over in the saddle by his cloak, while the fingers of his other hand caught the soldier's broad belt. He pulled the rider from the saddle with a powerful wrench and fell on him, pinning him to the ground. Only then did Geralt realize he had no weapon. He caught the man by the throat, but couldn't throttle him because of his iron gorget. The Nilfgaardian struggled, hit him with an armoured gauntlet and gashed his cheek. The Witcher smothered his opponent with his entire body, groped for the misericord in the broad belt, and jerked it out of its sheath. The man on the ground felt it and howled. Geralt fended off the arm with the silver scorpion on the sleeve that was still hitting him, and raised the dagger to strike. The Nilfgaardian screamed. The Witcher plunged the misericord into his open mouth, up to the hilt. When he got to his feet, he saw horses without riders, bodies, and a cavalry unit heading away towards the battle. The Cintrans from the camp had dispatched their Nilfgaardian pursuers, and had not even noticed the poet or the 2 men fighting on the ground in the gloom among the low pine trees. "Dandelion, where were you hit? Where's the arrow?" "In my head. It's stuck in my head."
"Don't talk nonsense." "Bloody hell, you were lucky. It only grazed you."
"I'm bleeding." Geralt removed his jerkin and tore off a shirt sleeve. The point of the quarrel had caught Dandelion above the ear, leaving a nasty-looking gash extending to his temple. The poet kept bringing his shaking hand up to the wound, and then looking at the blood, which was profusely spattering his hands and cuffs. His eyes were vacant. The Witcher realized he was dealing with a person who, for the first time in his life, had been wounded and was in pain, who, for the first time in his life, was seeing his own blood in such quantities. "Get up," he said, wrapping the shirt sleeve quickly and clumsily around the troubadour's head. "It's nothing, Dandelion. It's only a scratch. Get up. We have to get out of here fast." The battle on the field raged on in the dark. The clatter of steel, neighing of horses and screams grew louder and louder. Geralt quickly caught 2 Nilfgaardian steeds, but it turned out one was sufficient. Dandelion managed to get up, but immediately sat down again, groaned and sobbed pitifully. The Witcher lifted him to his feet, shook him back to consciousness, and hauled him into the saddle. Geralt mounted behind the wounded poet and spurred the horse east to where, above the already visible pale blue streaks of the dawn, hung the brightest star of the 7 Goats constellation. "Dawn will be breaking soon," Milva said, looking not at the sky, but at the glistening surface of the river. "The catfish are tormenting the small fry, but there's neither hide nor hair of the Witcher or Dandelion. Oh, I hope Regis didn't mess up." "Don't tempt fate," Kaya muttered, adjusting the girth of the recovered chestnut colt. Milva looked around for a piece of wood to knock on. "But it does seem to be like that. Whoever encounters your Ciri, it's as though they've put their head on the block. That girl brings misfortune. Misfortune and death." "Spit that out, Milva." She spat obediently, as superstition demanded. "Oh, there's such a chill. I'm shivering, and I'm thirsty. But I saw another rotting corpse in the river near the bank. Phew, I feel sick. I think I'm going to throw up." "There you go," Kaya said, handing her a canteen. "Drink that, and sit down close to me. I'll keep you warm." Another catfish struck a shoal of minnows in the shallows, and they scattered near the surface in a silver hail. A bat or nightjar flashed past in a beam of moonlight.
"Who knows,"
Milva muttered pensively, cuddling up to Cair,
"what tomorrow will bring? Who'll cross that river, and who'll perish?"
What will be, will be. Drive those thoughts away.
"Aren't you afraid?"
I am. What about you?
"I feel sick."
There was a lengthy pause.
"Tell me, Cair, when did you meet Ciri?"
For the first time? 3 years ago, during the fight for Cintra. I got her out of the city. I found her, beset by fire. I rode through the fire, through the flames and smoke, holding her in my arms. And she was like a flame herself.
And?
You can't hold a flame in your hands.
"If it isn't Ciri and Niflgaard," she said after a long silence, "then who is it?"
I don't know. Drakenborg, the Redanian fortress, converted into an internment camp for elves and other subversive elements, had some grim traditions which had evolved during its 3 years of operation. One of those traditions was dawn hangings. Another was gathering all those under death sentences in a large common cell from which they were led out to the gallows at daybreak. About a dozen of the condemned were grouped together in the cell, and every morning 2, 3, or occasionally 4 of them were hanged. The others waited their turn. A long time, sometimes as long as a week. The condemned were called clowns, because the mood around the death cell was always jolly. Firstly, at meals, prisoners were served very thin, sour wine, nicknamed Dijkstra Dry in the camp, as it was no secret that they could enjoy it at the behest of the head of the Redanian Secret Service. Secondly, no one was dragged to the sinister underground washhouse to be interrogated any longer, nor were the warders allowed to maltreat the convicts. The tradition was also observed that night. It was merry in the cell, being occupied by 6 elves, a half-elf, a halfling, 2 humans, and a Niflgaardian. Dijkstra Dry was poured into a single, shared tin plate, and lapped up without the use of the arms, since that method gave the greatest chance of at least some intoxication by the gnat's piss. Only one of the elves, a Scoia'tael from Iorwerth's defeated commando, recently severely tortured in the washhouse, retained his composure and dignity, and was busy carving the words, "Freedom or Death," on a post. There were several hundred similar inscriptions on the posts around the cell. The remaining condemned convicts, also in keeping with tradition, sang the clown's anthem over and over again, a song composed in Drakenborg by an unknown author. Every convict learned the words in the barracks as the song drifted to them at night from the condemned cell, knowing that the day would come when they would join the choir. The clowns dance on the scaffold, rhythmically twitching and jerking. They sing their song of sadness and beauty, and the clowns have all the fun. Every corpse will recall when the stool's kicked away and his eyes roll up to the sun. The bolt rattled, the key grated in the lock, and the clowns stopped singing. Warders entering at dawn could only mean one thing. In a moment, the choir would be depleted by several voices. The only question was whose. The warders entered together. All were carrying ropes to tie the hands of the convicts being led to the scaffold. One sniffed, shoved his cudgel under his arm, unrolled a scroll of parchment, and cleared his throat. "Ekel Troggleton." "Traiglathan," the elf from Iorwerth's commander corrected him softly. He looked at the carved slogan once more, and struggled to his feet. "Cosmo Boldenveg?" The halfling swallowed loudly. Nazarian knew Boldenveg had been imprisoned on charges of acts of sabotage carried out on the instructions of the Niflgaardian Secret Service. However, Boldenveg had not admitted his guilt, and stubbornly maintained he had stolen both cavalry horses on his own initiative to make some money, and that Niflgaard had nothing to do with it. He had clearly not been believed. "Nazarian!" Nazarian stood up obediently and held his hands out for the warders to bind. When the 3 of them were being led out, the rest of the clowns took up the song. The clowns dance on the scaffold, merrily twitching and jerking, and the wind carries their song. The chorus echoing all round. The dawn glowed purple and red, heralding a beautiful sunny day. The clown's anthem, thought Nazarian, was misleading. They could not dance a jaunty jig, since they were not hanged from a gibbet with a crossbeam, but from ordinary posts sunk into the ground. They didn't have stools kicked from under them, but practical, low birch blocks bearing the marks of frequent use. The song's anonymous author, who had been executed the previous year, could not have known that when he composed it. Like all the other convicts, he was only acquainted with the details shortly before his death. In Drakenborg, the executions were never carried out in public. They were a just punishment, and not sadistic vengeance. Those words were also attributed to Dijkstra. The elf from Eorweth's commando shook the warder's hands off, stepped onto the block without hesitation, and allowed the noose to be placed around his neck. The block was kicked out from under his feet. The halfling required 2 blocks, which were placed one on top of the other. The alleged saboteur did not bother with any grandiloquent cries. His short legs kicked vigorously, and then sagged against the post. His head lolled slackly on his shoulder. When the warders seized Nazarian, he suddenly changed his tune. "I'll talk," he croaked. "I'll testify. I have important information for Dijkstra." "Bit late for that," said Vascoin, the deputy commander for political affairs at Drakenborg, who was assisting at the execution doubtingly. "The sight of the noose rouses the imagination in every second one of you." I'm not making it up," Nazarian appealed, struggling in the executioner's arms. "I've got information." Less than an hour later, Nazarian was sitting in a seclusion cell, delighting in the beauty of life. A messenger stood at readiness beside his horse, scratching his groin vigorously, and Vascoin was reading and checking the report, which was about to be sent to Dijkstra. "I humbly inform your lordship that the felon by the name of Nazarian, sentenced for an assault on a royal official, has testified to the following: that, acting on the orders of a certain Ryons, on the day of the July new moon this year, with 2 of his accomplices, the elven half-breeds Shiru and Millet, he did take part in the murder of the jurists Codringer and Fenn in the city of Dorian. Millet was killed there, but the half-breed Shiru murdered the 2 jurists and set their house on fire. The felon Nazarian shifts all the blame onto the said Shiru, denies and refutes any suggestion that he committed the murders, but that is probably owing to fear of the gallows. What may interest your lordship, however, is that prior to the crime against the jurists being committed, the said malefactors, that is, Nazarian, the half-elf Shiru, and Millet, were hunting a witcher, a certain Geralt of Rivia, who had been holding secret meetings with the jurist Codringer. To what end the felon Nazarian does not know, because neither the aforementioned Ryons nor the half-elf Shiru did divulge the secret to him. But when Ryons was given the report concerning their collusions, he ordered the jurists to be destroyed. The felon Nazarian further testified that his accomplice Shiru stole some documents from the jurists, which were later delivered to Ryons at an inn called the Sly Fox in Heiress. What Ryons and Shiru conversed about there is not known to Nazarian, but the following day the criminal trio travelled to Brugge, where, on the 4th day after the new moon, they committed the abduction of a maiden from a red brick house, on the door of which a pair of brass shears were affixed. Ryons drugged her with a magic potion, and the malefactors Shiru and Nazarian conveyed her in great haste by carriage to the stronghold of Nastrog in Verden. And now, a matter which I commend to your lordship's close attention. The malefactors handed the abducted maid over to the stronghold's Niflgaardian commandant, assuring him that the said individual was Ciri of Cintra. The commandant, as testified by the felon Nazarian, was greatly content with these tidings. I dispatch the above in strict confidence to your lordship by messenger. I shall likewise send an exhaustive report of the interrogation when the scribe has made a fair copy. I humbly request instructions from your lordship as to what to do with the felon Nazarian, whether to order him stung with a bullwhip so that he remembers more, or hang him according to regulations. Your loyal servitor. Vascoin signed the report with a flourish, affixed a seal, and summoned the messenger. Dijkstra was acquainted with the contents of the report that evening, Philippa Eilhart by noon of the following day. By the time the horse carrying the Witcher and Dandelion emerged from the riverside alders, Milva and Caer were extremely agitated. They had heard the battle, as the water of the Ina carried the sounds a great distance. As she helped lift the poet down from the saddle, Milva saw Geralt stiffening at the sight of the Nilfgaardian. However, she did not say anything, and neither did the Witcher, for Dandelion was moaning desperately and swooning. They laid him down on the sand, placing a folded-up cloak beneath his head. Milva had just set about changing the blood-soaked makeshift dressing when she felt a hand on her shoulder and smelled the familiar scent of wormwood, aniseed, and other herbs. Regis, as was his custom, had appeared unexpectedly out of thin air. "Let me," he said, pulling instruments and other paraphernalia from his sizable medical bag. "I'll take it from here." When the barber-surgeon peeled the dressing from the wound, Dandelion groaned pitifully. "Relax," Regis said, cleansing the wound. "It's nothing. Only blood. Only a little blood. Your blood smells nice, poet." At precisely that moment, the Witcher did something Milva would never have expected. He walked over to the horse and drew a long Nilfgaardian sword from the scabbard fastened under the saddle flap. "Move away from him," he snarled, standing over the barber-surgeon. "The blood smells nice," Regis repeated, not paying the slightest bit of attention to the Witcher. "I can't detect in it the smell of infection, which with a head wound could have disastrous consequences. The main arteries and veins are intact. This will sting a little." Dandelion groaned and took a sharp intake of breath. The sword in the Witcher's hand vibrated and glistened with light reflected from the river. "I'll put in a few stitches," Regis said, continuing to ignore both the Witcher and his sword. "Be brave, Dandelion." Dandelion was brave. "Almost done here," Regis said, setting about bandaging the victim's head. "Don't you worry, Dandelion. You'll be right as rain. The wound's just right for a poet, Dandelion. You'll look like a war hero, with a proud bandage around your head, and the hearts of the maidens looking at you will melt like wax. Yes, a truly poetic wound. Unlike an abdominal wound, for instance. Liver all cut up, kidneys and guts mangled, stomach contents and feces pouring out, peritonitis. Right, that's done. Geralt, I'm all yours." He stood, and the Witcher brought the sword up against his throat as quick as lightning. "Move away," he snapped at Milva. Regis didn't twitch, even though the point of the sword was pressing gently against his neck. The archer held her breath, seeing the barber-surgeon's eyes glowing in the dark with a strange, cat-like light. "Go on," Regis said calmly. "Thrust it in." "Geralt?" Dandelion spoke from the ground, totally alert. "Are you utterly insane? He saved us from the gallows, and patched me up." "He saved us and the girl in the camp," Milva recalled softly. "Be quiet, all of you. You don't know what he is." The barber-surgeon did not move, and Milva suddenly saw what she ought to have seen long before. Regis did not cast a shadow. "Indeed," he said slowly, "you don't know what I am, and it's time you did. My name is Emil Regis Rohelek Tertiev Godefroy. I have lived on this earth for 428 years, according to your reckoning, or 642 years by the elven calendar. I'm the descendant of survivors, unfortunate beings imprisoned here after the cataclysm you call the conjunction of the spheres. I am regarded, to put it mildly, as a monster, as a blood-sucking fiend, and now I've encountered a Witcher who earns his living eliminating creatures such as I. And that's it." "And that is enough," Geralt said, lowering the sword. "More than enough. Now scram, Emil Regis, whatever it was. Get out of here." "Astonishing," Regis sneered. "You're permitting me to leave? Me, who represents a danger to people? A Witcher ought to make use of every opportunity to eliminate dangers of this kind." "Get lost. Make yourself scarce and do it fast." "To which far-flung corner should I make myself scarce?" Regis asked slowly. "You're a Witcher, after all. You know about me. When you've dealt with your problem, when you've sorted out whatever you need to sort out, you'll probably return to these parts. You know where I live, where I spend my time, how I earn my keep. Will you come after me?" "It's possible. If there's a bounty, I am a witcher.
I wish you luck, Regis said, fastening his bag and spreading his cape. Farewell. One more thing. How high would the price on my head have to be in order for you to bother? How high do you value me?
Bloody high.
You tickle my vanity. To be precise?
Fuck off, Regis.
I'm going. But first, put a value on me, if you please.
I've usually taken the equivalent of a good saddle horse for an ordinary vampire. But you, after all, are not ordinary.
How much?
I doubt, the Witcher said, his voice as cold as ice. I doubt whether anyone could afford it.
I understand, and thank you,
the vampire said, smiling. This time he bared his teeth. At the sight, Milva and Caia stepped back, and Dandelion stifled a cry of horror.
Farewell. Good luck.
Farewell, Regis. Same to you.
Emil Regis Rohetlek Tertiev Godefroy shook his cape, wrapped himself up in it with a flourish, and vanished. He simply vanished.
And now, Geralt said, spinning around, the unsheathed sword still in his hand. It's your turn, Nilfgaardian.
No, Milva interrupted angrily. I've had a belly for this. To horse. Let's get out of here. Shouts carry over the water, and before we know it, someone will be hot on our trail.
I'm not going any further in his company.
Go on alone, then, she yelled, furious. The other way. I'm up to here with your moods, Witcher. You've driven Regis away, even though he saved your life, and that's your business. But Caia saved me, so we're comrades. If he's an enemy to you, go back to Armeria. Suit yourself. Your mates are waiting for you there with a noose.
Stop shouting.
Well, don't just stand there. Help me get Dandelion onto the gelding.
You rescued our horses. Roach, too.
He did,
she said, nodding towards Caia.
Let's be going.
They forded the Aina. They rode along the right-hand bank alongside the river, through shallow backwaters, through wetlands and old riverbeds, through swamps and marshes resounding with the croaking of frogs and the quacking of unseen mallards and garganys. The day exploded with red sunlight, blindingly sparkling on the surfaces of small lakes overgrown with water lilies, and they turned towards a point where one of the Aina's numerous branches flowed into the Yaruga. Now they were riding through tenebrous, gloomy forests, where the trees grew straight from the marsh, green with duckweed. Milva led the way, riding beside the Witcher, busy giving him an account of Caia's story in hushed tones. Geralt was as silent as the grave, never once looking back at the Nilfgaardian, who was riding behind them, helping the poet. Dandelion moaned a little from time to time, swore and complained that his head was hurting, but held out bravely, without slowing down the march. His mood had improved with the recovery of Pegasus and the loot fastened to the saddle. Around noon, they rode out once more into sunny wetlands, beyond which the broad, calm waters of the great Yaruga stretched out. They forced their way through dried-up riverbeds and waded through shallows and backwaters, and happened upon an island, a dry spot among the marshes and tussocks of grass between the river's numerous offshoots. The island was overgrown with bushes and willows, and there were a few taller trees growing on it, bare, withered, and white from cormorant's guano. Milva was the first to notice a boat among the reeds, which must have been deposited there by the current. She was also the first to spot a clearing among the osiers, which was a perfect place for a rest. They stopped, and the Witcher decided it was time to talk to the Nilfgaardian, face to face and without witnesses. I spared your life on Thaneth. I felt sorry for you, whippersnapper. It's the biggest mistake I've ever made. Early this morning, I let a higher vampire go, even though he is certain to have several human lives on his conscience. I ought to have killed him, but I couldn't be bothered with him, for I'm preoccupied with one thought, to get my hands on the people who harmed Ciri. I've sworn that those who've harmed her will pay for it with their blood. Caia did not speak. Your revelations, which Milva has told me about, don't change anything. There's only one conclusion. You were unable to abduct Ciri on Thaneth, despite your best efforts. Now you're trailing me so that I can lead you to her, so that you can get your hands on her again, because then your Imperator might spare you and not send you to the scaffold. Kair said nothing. Geralt felt bad. Very bad.
"She cried out in the night because of you," he snapped. "You grew to nightmarish proportions in her child's eyes. But actually you were, and are, only a tool, a wretched minion of your Imperator. I don't know what you did to become a nightmare for her, and the worst thing is, I don't understand why, in spite of everything, I can't kill you. I don't understand what's holding me back."
"Perhaps," Kair said softly, "that despite all the circumstances and appearances, we have something in common, you and I.
You reckon?"
Like you, I want to rescue Ciri. Like you, I don't care if that surprises or astonishes anybody. Like you, I have no intention of justifying my motives to anybody."
"Is that all?"
"No."
"Very well. Go on."
"Ciri," the Nilfgaardian began slowly, "is riding a horse through a dusty village, with 6 other young people. Among those people is a girl with close-cropped hair. Ciri is dancing on a table in a barn, and is happy."
"Milva has told you about my dreams."
"No. She hasn't told me anything. Do you believe me?"
"No."
Kair lowered his head and ground his heel in the sand. "I'd forgotten," he said, "that you can't believe me, can't trust me. I understand that. But like you, I had one more dream. A dream you haven't told anyone about, because I seriously doubt that you'd want to tell anyone about it." It could be said that Servadio was simply in luck. He had come to Laredo without intending to spy on anyone in particular. But the village wasn't called the Bandits' Lair for no reason. Laredo lay on the bandits' trail, and brigands and thieves from all the regions of the Upper Velda called in there, met up to sell or barter loot, to stock up with provisions and tackle, and relax and enjoy themselves in the select company of fellow criminals. The village had been burnt down several times, but the few permanent and more numerous temporary residents would rebuild it each time. They lived off the bandits, and did very well, thank you, and snoopers and narcs like Servadio always had the opportunity to pick up some information there, which might be worth a few florins to the prefect. This time, Servadio was counting on more than just a few, because the rats were riding into the village. They were led by Gisela and flanked by Iskra and Kaylee. Behind them rode Missel and the new flaxen-haired girl they called Folka. Asa and Reef brought up the rear, pulling some riderless horses, doubtlessly stolen with intent to sell. The rats were tired and dust-covered, but bore themselves briskly in the saddle, enthusiastically responding to greetings from the various comrades and acquaintances they happened to see. After dismounting and being given beer, they immediately entered noisy negotiations with traders and fences. All of them except Missel and the new flaxen-haired one, who wore a sword slung across her back. These two set off among the stalls which, as usual, covered the village green. Laredo had its market days, and the range of goods on offer, with the visiting bandits in mind, was especially rich and varied then. Today was such a day. Servadio cautiously followed the girls. In order to make any money, he had to have information, and in order to have information, he had to eavesdrop. The girls looked at colourful scarves, beads, embroidered blouses, saddlecloths, and ornate brow bands for their horses. They sifted through the goods, but didn't buy anything. Missel kept a hand on the fair-haired girl's shoulder almost the whole time. The snooper cautiously moved closer, pretending to be looking at the straps and belts on a leatherworker's stall. The girls were talking, but quietly. He couldn't hear them, and was too afraid to approach them any closer. They might have noticed, grown suspicious. Candy floss was being sold at one of the stalls. The girls walked over. Missel bought 2 sticks wrapped round with a snow-white sweetmeat and handed one to the flaxen-haired girl. She nibbled it delicately. A white strand stuck to her lip. Missel wiped it off with a careful, tender movement. The flaxen-haired girl opened her emerald-green eyes widely, slowly licked her lips and smiled, cocking her head playfully. Servadio felt a shudder, a cold trickle running between his shoulder blades. He recalled the rumours going around about the 2 female bandits. He was going to withdraw stealthily, since it was clear he wouldn't pick up any useful information. The girls weren't talking about anything important. However, not far away, where the senior members of various bandit gangs were gathered, Gisela, Kaylee, and the others were noisily quarrelling, haggling and yelling, every now and then holding mugs under the tap of a small cask. Servadio was likely to learn more from them. One of the rats might let something slip, if only a single word, betraying the gang's current plans, their route or their destination. Should he manage to eavesdrop and supply the information in time to the prefect's soldiers or the Nilfgaardian spies who showed a lively interest in the rats, the reward was practically his for the taking. And were the prefect to set a successful trap, thanks to his information, Servadio could count on a considerable injection of funds. "I'll buy the old lady a sheepskin coat," he thought feverishly. "I'll finally get the kids some shoes, and maybe some toys. And for me..." The girls wandered between the stalls, licking and nibbling the candy floss from the sticks. Servadio suddenly noticed they were being watched and pointed at. He knew who was doing the pointing. Footpads and horse thieves from the gang of Pinter, also known as Otterpelt. The thieves exchanged several provocatively loud comments and cackled with glee. Missel squinted and placed her hand on the flaxen-haired girl's shoulder. "Turtle doves," one of the thieves snorted. He was a beanpole with a moustache like a bunch of oakum. "Look, they'll be billing and cooing next." Servadio saw the flaxen-haired girl tense up and noticed that Missel's grip on her shoulder tightened. The thieves all chuckled. Missel turned around slowly, and several of them stopped laughing. But the one with the oakum moustache was either too drunk or too lacking in imagination to take the hint. "Maybe one of you needs a man," he said, moving closer and making obscene, suggestive movements. "All you need is a good shag, and you'll cure that kink in a flash. Hey, I'm talking to you. You..." He didn't manage to touch her. The flaxen-haired girl coiled up like an attacking adder, and her sword flashed and struck before the candy floss she released had hit the ground. The mustachioed thief staggered and gobbled like a turkey, the blood from his butchered neck gushing in a long stream. The girl, coiled up again, was on him in 2 nimble steps and struck once more, a wave of gore splashing the stalls. The corpse toppled over, the sand around it immediately turning red. Someone screamed. A second thief leant over and drew a knife from his bootleg, but at the same moment slumped, struck by Gisela with the metal handle of his knout. "One stiff's enough," the rat's leader yelled. "That one's only got himself to blame. He didn't know who he was crossing. Back off, Falker." Only then did the flaxen-haired girl lower her sword. Gisela took out a purse and shook it. "According to the laws of our brotherhood, I'm paying for the man who was killed. Fairly, according to his weight, a thaler for every pound of the lousy cadaver, and that'll put an end to the feud. Am I right, comrades? Pinto, what do you say?" Iskra, Kaylee, Reef, and Asa stood behind their leader. They had faces of stone and held their hands on their sword hilts. "That's fair," Otterpelt replied, surrounded by his gang. He was a short, bow-legged man in a leather tunic. "You're right, Gisela. The feud's over." Servadio swallowed, trying to melt into the crowd now gathering at the scene. He swiftly lost all interest in stalking the rats or the flaxen-haired girl they called Folker. He decided that the reward promised by the prefect was not nearly as high as he'd thought. Folker calmly sheathed her sword and looked around. Servadio was dumbstruck at the sudden change in her expression. "My candy floss," the girl whined miserably, looking at her treat lying soiled in the sand. "I dropped my candy floss." Missel hugged her. "I'll buy you another." The Witcher sat on the sand among the willows, gloomy, angry, and lost in thought. He was looking at the cormorants sitting on the shit-covered tree. After their conversation, Cair had vanished into the bushes and had not reappeared. Milva and Dandelion were looking for something to eat. They had managed to find a copper cauldron and a truck of vegetables under some nets in the boat which had been washed up by the current. They set a wicker trap they had found in the boat in a riverside channel, then waded near to the bank and began hitting the rushes with sticks in order to drive fish into it. The poet was now feeling better and was strutting around as proud as a peacock with his heroically bandaged head. Geralt continued to brood and sulk. Milver and Dandelion hauled the fish pot out and began to swear, for instead of the catfish and carp they had expected, all they saw was silvery fry wriggling around inside. The Witcher stood up. "Come over here, you two. Leave that trap and come here. I've got something to tell you." "You're returning home," he began bluntly when they came over, wet and stinking of fish. "Head north, towards Mahakam. I'm going on by myself." "What?" "Now we must go our separate ways. The party's over, Dandelion. You're going home to write poems. Milver will lead you through the forests. What's the matter?" "Nothing's the matter," Milver said, tossing her hair from her shoulder with a sudden movement. "Nothing. Speak, Witcher. I'd like to hear what you're going to say." "I don't have anything else to say. I'll go south, crossing to the Yaruga's far bank, through Nilfgaardian territory. It'll be a dangerous and long journey, and there's no time to waste, which is why I'm going by myself." "Having got rid of the inconvenient baggage?" Dandelion nodded. "The ball and chain slowing down your march and causing so many problems. In other words, me." "And me," Milver added, glancing to one side. "Listen," Geralt said, now much more calmly. "This is my own private matter. None of this concerns you. I don't want you to risk your necks for something that only concerns me." "It only concerns you," Dandelion repeated slowly. "You don't need anybody. Company impedes you and slows down your journey. You don't expect help from anybody, and you have no intention of relying on anybody. Furthermore, you love solitude. Have I forgotten anything?" "Naturally," Geralt replied angrily. "You've forgotten to swap your empty head for one with a brain. Had that arrow passed an inch to the right, you idiot, the rooks will be pecking out your eyes now. You're a poet, and you've got an imagination, so try imagining a scene like that. I repeat, you're returning north, and I'm heading in the opposite direction, by myself." "Go on then," Milver said, and sprang to her feet. "I'm not going to plead with you. Go to hell, Witcher. Come on, Dandelion, let's cook something. I'm starving, and listening to him makes me sick." Geralt turned his head away. He watched the green-eyed cormorants hanging their wings out to dry on the limbs of the guano-covered tree. He smelled the intense scent of herbs and swore furiously. "You're trying my patience, Regis." The vampire, who had suddenly appeared out of thin air, was unconcerned and sat down alongside the furious Witcher. "I have to change the poet's dressing," he said calmly. "Then go to him, but stay well away from me." Regis heaved a sigh, showing no intention of moving away. "I was listening to your conversation with Dandelion and the archer," he said, not without a hint of mockery in his voice. "I have to admit, you've got a real talent for winning people over. Though the entire world seems to be out to get you, you disregard the comrades and allies wanting to help you. The world turned upside down. A vampire's teaching me how to deal with humans. What do you know about humans, Regis? The only thing you know is the taste of their blood. Why am I still talking to you?" "The world turned upside down," the vampire admitted, deadpan. "You are talking to me, indeed. Perhaps you'd also like to listen to some advice." No, I wouldn't. I don't need to." "True. I'd forgotten. Advice is superfluous to you. Allies are superfluous. You'll get by without any travelling companions. The goal of your expedition is, after all, personal and private. More than that, the nature of the goal demands that you accomplish it alone, in person. The risks, dangers, hardships, and constant struggle with doubt must only burden you, for, after all, they are components of the penance, the expiation of guilt you want to earn. A baptism of fire, I'd say. You'll pass through fire which burns, but also purges, and you'll do it alone. For were someone to support you in this, help you, take on even a scrap of that baptism of fire, that pain, that penance, they would, by the same token, impoverish you. They would deprive you of part of the expiation you desire, which would be owed to them for their involvement. After all, it should be your exclusive expiation. Only you have a debt to pay off, and you don't want to run up debts with other creditors at the same time. Is my logic correct?" "Surprisingly so, considering you're sober. Your presence annoys me, vampire. Leave me alone with my expiation, please."
and with my debt."
"As you wish," Regis said, arising. "Sit and think. But I will give you some advice anyway. A sense of guilt, as well as the need for expiation, for a cleansing baptism of fire, aren't things you can claim an exclusive right to. Life differs from banking because it has debts which are paid off by running up debts with others.
Go away, please."
"As you wish." The vampire walked off and joined Dandelion and Milver. While Regis changed the dressing, the trio debated what to eat. Milver shook the fry from the fish pot and examined the catch critically. "There's nothing for it," she said. "We'll have to skewer the little tiddlers on twigs and grill them over the embers." "No," Dandelion demurred, shaking his freshly bandaged head. "That isn't a good idea. There are too few of them, and they won't fill us up. I suggest we make soup." "Fish soup? By all means. We have enough of these tiddlers, and we have salt," Dandelion said, counting out the list of ingredients on his fingers. "We've acquired onions, carrots, parsley root, and celery, and a cauldron. If we put it all together, we end up with soup." "Some seasoning would come in handy." "Oh," Regis smiled, reaching into his bag. "No problem there. Basil, pimento, pepper, bay leaves, sage." "Enough, enough!" Dandelion raised his hand, stopping him. "That'll do. We don't need mandrake in the soup. Right, let's get to work. Clean the fish, Milver." "Clean them yourself." "Ha! Just because you've got a woman in the company, it doesn't mean she'll slave for you in the kitchen. I'll bring the water and start the fire, and you can get yourself covered in guts with those weatherfish." "They aren't weatherfish," Regis said. "They're chub, roach, ruff, and silver bream." "Ah," Dandelion said, unable to keep quiet. "I see you know your fish." "I know lots of things," Regis replied neutrally, without boasting. "I've picked up this and that along the way." "If you're such a scholar," Milver said, blowing on the fire again and getting to her feet, "use your brain to get these tiddlers gutted. I'm getting the water." "Can you manage a full cauldron? Geralt, help her." "Course I can," Milver snorted, "and I don't need his help. He has his own personal issues. No one's to disturb him." Geralt turned his head away, pretending not to hear. Dandelion and the vampire skillfully prepared the small fry. "This soup's going to be thin," Dandelion said, hanging the cauldron over the fire. "We could do with a bigger fish." "Will this do?" Kaia said, suddenly emerging from the willows, carrying a 3-pound pike by the gills. It was still flexing its tail and opening and closing its mouth. "Oh, what a beauty! Where did you come by that, Nilfgaardian?" "I'm not a Nilfgaardian. I come from Vicovaro, and my name is Kaia." All right, we know all that. Now where did you get the pike?" "I knocked up a tip-up using a frog as bait. I cast it into a hollow under the bank. The pike took it right away." "Experts to a man," Dandelion said, shaking his bandaged head. "Pity I didn't suggest steak. You would have conjured up a cow. But let's make a start on what we've got. Regis, chuck all the fry into the cauldron, heads and tails and all, and the pike needs to be nicely dressed. Know how to, Kaia?" "Yes." "Get to work, then." "Geralt, damn it! Do you plan to sit there sulking for much longer? Peel the vegetables." The Witcher got up obediently and joined them, but stayed ostentatiously well away from Kaia. Before he had time to complain that there wasn't a knife, the Nilfgaardian, or possibly the Vicovarian, gave him his, taking another from his bootleg. Geralt took it, grunting his thanks. The teamwork was carried out efficiently. The cauldron, full of fingerlings and vegetables, was soon bubbling and frothing. The vampire dexterously skimmed off the froth using a spoon Milver had whittled. Once Kaia had dressed and divided up the pike, Dandelion threw the predator's tail, fins, spine, and toothed head into the cauldron and stirred. It smells delicious. Once it's all boiled down, we'll strain off the waste." "What, through our foot wraps?" Milver said with a grimace as she whittled another spoon. "How can we strain it without a sieve?" "But, my dear Milver," smiled Regis, "don't say that. We can easily replace what we don't have with what we do. It's purely a matter of invention and positive thinking." "Go to hell with your smart-ass chatter, vampire." "We'll sieve it through my hauberk," Kaia said. "Not a problem. It can be rinsed out afterwards."
It should be rinsed out before, too, Milva declared, or I won't eat it.
The sieving was carried out efficiently. Now throw the pike into the broth, Cair, Dandelion instructed. Smells delicious. Don't add any more wood, it just needs to simmer. Geralt, where are you shoving that spoon? You don't stir it now.
Don't yell, I didn't know.
Ignorance, Regis smiled, is no justification for ill-conceived actions. When one doesn't know or has doubts, it's best to seek advice.
Shut up, vampire,
Geralt said, stood up and turned his back on them. Dandelion snorted. He's taken offence. Look at him.
That's him all over,
Milva said, pouting.
He's all talk. If he doesn't know what to do, he just talks and gets offended. Haven't you lot caught on yet?
A long time ago, Cair said softly. Add pepper, Dandelion said, licking the spoon and smacking his lips, and some more salt. Ah, now it's just right. Take the cauldron off the heat.
Oh, by thunder, it's hot.
I don't have any gloves. I have, Cair said. And I, Regis said, seizing the cauldron from the other side, don't need any. Right, said the poet, wiping the spoon on his trousers. Well, company, be seated. Enjoy. Geralt, are you waiting for a special invitation? For a herald and a fanfare? They sat crowded around the cauldron on the sand, and for a long time all that could be heard was dignified slurping, interrupted by blowing on spoons. After half of the broth had been eaten, the cautious fishing out of pieces of pike began, until finally their spoons were scraping against the bottom of the cauldron.
Oh, I'm stuffed,
Milva groaned.
It wasn't a bad idea with that soup, Dandelion.
Indeed, Regis agreed. What do you say, Geralt?
I say,
thank you, the Witcher said, getting up with difficulty and rubbing his knee, which had begun to torment him again.
Will that do, or do you want a fanfare?
He's always like that, the poet said, waving a hand. Take no notice of him. You're lucky, anyway. I was around when he was fighting with that Yennefer of his, the one beauty with ebony hair. Be discreet, the vampire admonished Dandelion, and don't forget he has problems.
Problems, said Cair, stifling a burp. Are they to be solved?
Of course they are, Dandelion replied. But how? Milva snorted, making herself more comfortable on the hot sand.
The vampire is a scholar. He's sure to know.
It's not about knowledge, but about the skilful examination of the circumstances, Regis said calmly. And when the circumstances are examined, we come to the conclusion that we are facing an insoluble problem. The entire undertaking has no chance of success. The likelihood of finding Ciri amounts to 0.
But you can't say that, Milva jibed. We should think positively and use investigation. It's like it was with that sieve. If we don't have something, we find a replacement. That's how I see it.
Until recently, the vampire continued, we thought Ciri was in Niflgaard. Reaching the destination and rescuing her or abducting her seemed beyond our powers. Now, after hearing Cair's revelations, we have no idea where Ciri is. It's hard to talk about invention when we have no idea where we should be directing it.
What are we to do, then? Milva said, bridling. The Witcher insists on going south.
For him, Regis laughed, the points of the compass have no great importance. It's all the same to him which one he chooses, as long as he's not idle. That is truly a Witcher's principium. The world is full of evil, so it's sufficient to stride ahead and destroy the evil encountered on the way, in that way rendering a service to good. The rest takes care of itself. To put it another way, being in motion is everything. The goal is nothing.
Baloney, Milva commented. I mean,
Ciri's his goal. How can you say she's nothing? I was joking, the vampire admitted, winking at Geralt's back, which was still turned away from them. And not very tactfully. I apologize. You're right, dear Milva. Ciri is our goal, and since we don't know where she is, it would make sense to find out and direct our activities accordingly. The case of the Child of Destiny, I observe, is simply pulsating with magic, fate, and other supernatural elements. And I know somebody who is extremely knowledgeable about such matters, and will certainly help us.
Ah,
Dandelion said, delighted. Who's that? Where are they? Far from here? Closer than the capital of Niflgaard. In actual fact, really quite close. In Angren, on this bank of the Yaruga. I'm talking about the Druid Circle, which has its seat in the forests of Kaidu. Let's go without delay. Don't any of you, Geralt said, annoyed, think you should ask me my opinion? You, Dandelion said, turning around. But you haven't got a clue what you're doing. You even owe the soup you gobbled down to us. Were it not for us, you'd be hungry. We would be too, had we waited for you to act. The cauldron of soup was the result of cooperation, of teamwork, the joint efforts of a fellowship united by a common goal. Get it, friend? How could he get it? Milva said, grimacing. He's just me, by myself and all alone. A lone wolf. But you can see he's no hunter, that he's a stranger to the forest. Wolves don't hunt alone. Never. A lone wolf? Ha! What twaddle. Foolish, towny nonsense. But he doesn't understand that. Oh, he does, Rages cut in, smiling through pursed lips, as was his custom. He only looks stupid, Dandelion confirmed, but I do keep hoping he'll finally decide to strain his grey matter. Perhaps he'll come to some useful conclusions. Perhaps he'll realize the only activity that's worth doing alone is wanking. Kaia Mar Dyfrin ap Kialach remained tactfully silent. The hell with all of you, the Witcher finally said, sticking his spoon into his bootleg. The hell with all of you, you cooperative fellowship of idiots, united by a common goal which none of you understand, and the hell with me too. This time, the others, following Kaia's example, also remained tactfully silent. Dandelion, Maria Baring, also known as Milva, and Emil Regis Rohetlek Tertiev Godefroy. What a company I ended up with, Geralt continued, shaking his head. Brothers in arms. A team of heroes. What have I done to deserve it? A poet taster with a lute. A wild and lippy half-dryad, half-woman. A vampire who's about to notch up his 5th century, and a bloody Nilfgaardian who insists he isn't a Nilfgaardian. And leading the party is the Witcher, who suffers from pangs of conscience, impotence, and the inability to take decisions, Regis finished calmly. I suggest we travel incognito to avoid arousing suspicion. Or raising a laugh, Milva added. The Queen replied, Ask not me for mercy, but those whom you wronged with your magic. You had the courage to commit those deeds. Now have courage when your pursuers and justice are close at hand. It is not in my power to pardon your sins. Then the witch hissed like a cat, and her sinister eyes flashed. My end is nigh, she shrieked, but yours is too, O Queen. You shall remember Lara Doran and her curse in the hour of your dreadful death. And know this, my curse will hound your descendants unto the 10th generation. Seeing, however, that a doughty heart was beating in the Queen's breast, the evil elven witch ceased to malign her or try to frighten her with the curse, but began instead to whine for help and mercy like a bitch dog. The Tale of Lara Doran, as told by the humans. But her begging softened not the stony hearts of the Doina, the merciless, cruel humans. So when Lara, now not begging for mercy for herself, but for her unborn child, caught hold of the carriage door, on the order of the Queen, the thuggish executioner struck with a sword and hacked off her fingers. And when a severe frost descended in the night, Lara breathed her last on the forested hilltop, giving birth to a tiny daughter, whom she protected with the remains of the warmth still flickering in her. And though she was surrounded by the blizzard, the night and the winter, spring suddenly bloomed on the hilltop, and fienaveth flowers blossomed. Even today do those flowers bloom in only 2 places, in Dol Blatana and on the hilltop where Lara Doran ep Shiadal perished. The Tale of Lara Doran, as told by the elves.